So, I've been wanting to cover the topic of self diagnosis as it seems to be an issue in a number of ways lately. And in this video, I want to try to focus on the topics of identity and representation as it pertains to self diagnosis and autism. So, one thing I have seen happening on, of course, social media, but also kind of a larger, broader social discussion is people talking about identities and, you know, the right to that and so on. And of course, those larger discussions are happening around, like, I guess, gender, even race and sexuality. But on another level, things like autism have started to sort of get thrown into that mix. And people are using the justification that, people know themselves best, and, people know more about who they are than a doctor. They may know more about their day-to-day life experiences, I will agree with that. I think it would be foolish not to agree. However, that is a different thing than saying this person is a professional in diagnosing autism and assessing for differential diagnoses of autism. So you may know yourself very well. That doesn't mean that you can look at a diagnostic manual with an unbiased perception and accurately gauge what is in that manual and how it fits into your life. That's just not realistic, and that is not how that works. And this is a medical condition, it is not an identity. If somebody wants to take this concept and make it into an identity, I guess that's a different conversation, but there's going to have to be a different word used other than autism, because autism is a autism spectrum disorder now is a medical condition outright. It's not an identity. And people talk about this idea of gatekeeping, but that's why we have doctors. And they studied this for a very long time to figure out what these different things are and to understand this. And you get into this idea of people of different gender or racial backgrounds and so on might be less likely to be diagnosed at a younger age due to clinical biases. Well, the catch with that is we can't turn around and say those same groups of people should just start self-diagnosing, because then that means that those groups of people never get represented in the medical studies, because they're not looking for a diagnosis and they're not looking for treatment. And by treatment, I don't necessarily mean, some of the more controversial things, but treatment like just like mental health therapy to sort of better understand yourself and your own emotions and things like that. That should be helpful, and social skills groups, and even things like occupational therapy to and other things to help with sensory issues. So, and to get into all of that, all of those things are necessary to some extent and to on some way or another for people with autism. They can't get through life without those things. That's what makes the condition a condition, is it is impairing. And that's why you also have to meet clinical criteria that it is impairing. And somebody can have multiple traits of the condition, but if it's not impairing to them, they don't have autism. For the simple fact that it is a medical condition, and in order to be this medical condition, it has to be impairing. Full stop. There is a level of gatekeeping there, but in society we do have boundaries. And that doesn't make things unhealthy. It just means, you know, somebody who is impaired needs support services and needs therapy and needs all these other things. Somebody who's not impaired, well, they may struggle, they may have to come up with different ways to sort of navigate life, but that's true for everybody because everybody kind of has a slightly different brain. That's true even of the people who do get services. They can't just rely on their services to get them through life. They have to put in effort too. So that's kind of how that works. And this whole topic of, self diagnosing and I can identify as autistic and I know myself better, it's really changing the kind of shape and the structure of the autistic community. And I don't, I'm not saying that it's, don't get me wrong, I'm not pretending to go on a poor rant about how it's not just the white boys that are in autistic spaces anymore. That's not what I'm getting at. What's going on in these autistic spaces is conversations that are entirely unrelated to autism, and it's getting really divisive in a lot of ways too. Other conditions are kind of filtering into the mix. You've got conditions like DID, and I've seen epilepsy somewhat. Now, most people are not messing around with these kind of conditions, but some people, you start to question, and there's a lot of drama, especially amongst what seems like the self-diagnosed community, or a very late diagnosed, or there's all kinds of factors that are kind of, I don't mean late diagnosed, I do, but I've interacted with a couple people who quite literally went from doctor to doctor until they found one who would diagnose them with autism. And that's the reality of the situation. It was doctor shopping until they found one that they could tell all the right traits to. And, I've interacted with these people online, and this is happening. And it changes conversations that do have to do with autism. Things like representation. And I'll be quite honest. I love the movie Rain Man. It is one of my the favorites. I know there's a lot wrong with it, problematic with it, but at the end of the day, I think it's a cute little movie, and I don't think that people critique it in a way that is, for lack of a better word, legitimate. Because they say that this movie caused everyone to think that autistic people are savants. I think that is an absolutely ludicrous complaint because this movie just happened to mention the word autism in one of the last kind of film edits of the movie. They added that in, and it wasn't, it just happened to include Tom Hanks, Dustin Hoffman, major box office movie stars, and it put the name or the word autism sort of into the social awareness, consciousness, if you will. And with as well the change in the DSM that was released in the mid 90s, people started to know a lot more about autism and to understand a lot more about it. So to sit there and blame this movie for the public associating autism with savants, I think is a bit of a overstep. Actually a lot of an overstep. This was never the intention of the movie. This isn't what the movie is about. And quite frankly, what is there to exactly critique? And it's fair to say Dustin Hoffman isn't autistic. Okay, fine. And that a big part of the plot relies on a disability. Okay, fine. Yes, I understand those two complaints. But on the topic of autism itself, Dustin Hoffman's performance was absolutely incredible. He was stellar, and he got everything right on. So, for this group of people, he represented them quite accurately to the public. And this was a way that helped get awareness for one group of people. You know, you sit back and say everybody with autism is different, then you can't exactly complain when there is a representation of autism that's not representing you. Because chances are, if everybody with autism is different, then there will literally never be a representation of autism that you completely relate to. That's just how it is. And of course, there may be characters that you relate to more than others, but that's true for everybody. That's, and the person that relates more to the person chatting with you or whatever may be relating to a different character more. And that's just because everyone experiences these things differently. Just because some shows or movies have become popular, I don't think that's fair to say that these shows have made people believe this is what autism is, and this has changed perceptions. And I think things are changing quite a lot. You've got people like Greta Thunberg, I think that's her last name, and you've got autistic representation nowadays that's increasing. So I think to always rely on this narrative that I don't get represented and therefore I'm not visible, I think is a self-defeating idea, and it actually hurts the movement long term. And it also, changes what is considered okay in terms of representation. It Dustin Hoffman, like I said, had a stellar performance, and unless you want to complain about the plot or the the fact that Dustin Hoffman was not autistic, I I don't, there's nothing much to complain about. And to that end, the people who Dustin Hoffman represented, namely Kim Peeks, he did kind of manifest the traits of other people too, and he met with other autistic people. But Kim Peeks and his father were the ones who wanted to kind of be the poster child of who Rain Man was, the real life Rain Man. So they profited off of it, and they wanted to do that. And these other families were very much involved with this process. So, to sit there and say now, decades later, that this isn't okay, that people weren't involved, is to flat out not understand the history of the movie and how it was created. So that's kind of where we are. So in terms of representation, I think some of the debates going on right now are missing the point. I think some of the debates right now are, frankly, just ignorant. And that's not meant in a mean way, but people simply lack knowledge. And unfortunately, with the internet, there has been a massive dispersal of knowledge at your fingertips, but it's not always easy to tell how to use it. So, like with these diagnostic tools, you're not just supposed to use them as kind of reading through yourself to assess yourself. You're supposed to go over them with an assessor and talk them out, and, the assessor will ultimately pick which one. And, of course, all these tests are different, but to that end, you don't all. A lot of these tests aren't meant to be completed online the way they are done online in the simplistic fashion. They're meant to be a more interactive method. And there's just so many issues with this whole concept of self-diagnosis and thinking that we know ourselves better than doctors, and we've been studying this thing longer than doctors. Well, okay, but doctors have been studying all of medicine for that amount of time. And most of them didn't just go into that profession on a whim, so there's probably some sort of background to that. Anyway, this video is getting a bit long, and it's kind of not really having much of a direction, but this is just some kind of issues relating to this notion of identity and autism and how that impacts this issue of representation of the autistic community. Thanks.